training workshops put on by the growing Indigenous Storytellers Fellowship, which is in partnership with IJA, the Indigenous Journalists Association, JHR, Journalists for Human Rights, APTN News, and with support from the Google News Initiative. I'm Francine Compton. Aning Boju. Hello, how are you? I'm the Associate Director for the Indigenous Journalists Association. I'm an Anishinaabe and a citizen of Sandy Bay, Ojibwe First Nation, which is located in Manitoba. We are so pleased to have Trina Roache join us for this session. We will have 45 minutes with Trina, and there will be a chance to ask some questions in between and at the end. And also, if you do have questions along the way, please put them in the chat, and that way we can capture those questions and try to get to as many of your questions as possible. And Trina Roache, I've actually worked with Trina many, many years ago at APTN for APTN News. Trina is a Mi'kmaw journalist, and she is an assistant professor at the School of Journalism at the University of King's College in Kjipuktuk, also known as Halifax. She is a storyteller at heart, and she brings over 2 decades of reporting experience to her role as an educator and journalist. She's reported for multiple platforms, including long-form audio and video for the CBC, APTN National News, APTN Investigates, and Canada's National Observer, also Canada Land Back podcast, and more. Thank you so much, Trina. I'll hand it over to you for writing to pictures.
Well, Alan, thank you, Francine. Yeah, Gwe, Deluisi Trina, well Dasi. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a member of the Glooscap First Nation, which is a Mi'kmaw community here in what we now call Nova Scotia. And yeah, I actually started in radio, and then worked for APTN for the most of my career. Was spent working for APTN in visual storytelling. I fell in love with filming and editing and video journalism, and really felt it was such a privilege and an honor to be able to tell the stories. I'm also host, so I'm admitting people to tell the stories that are happening in our community. It was, just when I think back on some of the important places, the little small communities that most Canadians never get to, the moments we get to be a part of, and the people we get to meet. It's been a real amazing career. And a privilege to tell those stories, and a big responsibility. We're in these communities, and we have to go back to the communities that we report in. And so we learn pretty quick, usually in community, when we haven't done a story as best as we could have. And so those lessons to me were really important and shaped how I told stories. I knew who I needed to talk to and all of those things. As a journalist, you're doing it. You're on deadline. Now that I'm teaching, now that I'm a professor, I'm sort of thinking about it. So I've gone from this sort of reflexive practice of it to a much more reflective, thinking critically about how we can tell stories in a good way. And maybe I'll just start. I'm going to share screen if I have to do this right. Hopefully there's no technical snafus, but I'm going to share, just wait. I'm going to share screen and hope that we have sound and all of that fun stuff. So it should be this one. And it says I'm going to share sound, so hopefully there's sound. Can everyone see my slides? Okay, perfect. So this session is, I'm really happy that you guys asked me to do this. Writing to pictures, it's very tightly focused on writing to pictures. I am going to leave time, as they said, for questions, but your questions can be broader if you like. Writing to pictures, I'm sort of giving you that technical, like literally writing with sound and pictures. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about when you're talking about storytelling in terms of, thinking in scenes and creating a narrative. I'm not going to, you can't fit everything in. Oh, someone else is coming in. This is very focused, but if you have any other questions, like I said, drop it in the chat. This next story, when I worked for APTN, often we're in communities and we're telling stories that, I'm just going to minimize you guys for a sec. We're telling stories that, often are ongoing actions. Like Indigenous people, if there's protests and rallies, it's not just a single day event. It's often a decades long experience for communities, in the fight for justice for things. And so we live as reporters, we live with these stories too. And so for a very long time. So I had covered Muskrat Falls, the hydroelectric dam in the sort of I'm terrible with dates. I think it might have been 2016 or so. And green energy, it's great, except if you live near the dam. So I covered it for Daily News, and then when I moved over to Investigates, I covered it in a more documentary long form format. But we were there, a group of people, Innu and Inuit Labrador land protectors, had actually gone in and shut down Nalcor for 5 days. And so one of the things when you're reporting is, we were standing on the side outside the gates and we were there to capture the moment that they came out. So I'll just play just the beginning of this story that aired. It would have aired probably that night, very tight to deadline, I think. I'll just play them.
It was a powerful moment. Close to 50 people, Innu, Inuit, and allies, walked to the gates at Muskrat Falls, ending their 5-day occupation. They effectively shut down a multi-billion-dollar hydro project, sending 700 Nalcor workers home. And in concert with rallies here outside the gates and hunger strikes, forced the government of Newfoundland and Labrador to the table with Indigenous leaders.
Oh, there's no sound?
Let's not forget, it's not the tree.
I can hear it. So I'm just wondering,
it?
is there anybody else who doesn't have sound?
Oh, because we tested this beforehand.
Yeah.
Sound.
I can hear it.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So here, I'll just jump forward. It was pretty much it.
I think we were just shut down a multi-billion-dollar hydro project, sending 700 Nalcor workers home. And in concert with rallies here outside the gates and hunger strikes, forced the government of Newfoundland and Labrador to the table with Indigenous leaders.
But let's not forget, it's not the three Aboriginal leaders that accomplished for Labrador. It's the people that were struggling inside these states that accomplished what is being celebrated today.
But we're the ones who went through that gate. We took the gate and we took Muskrat Falls. No other elected leader in Labrador did, but we did it. The people did it.
On Tuesday, Inuit...
And that's we don't have to watch any more of it. But that story, the people that I met, the compelling moments that we're able to catch, it's just, to me, it's been just an incredible experience as a journalist. But like I said, a really big responsibility. And now that I'm teaching, I teach a lot of video courses, either as video courses or, other courses, like I teach a course called Reporting in Mi'kmaq. So we go into a Mi'kmaq community. Students do stories that are multimedia. So they've got text and photos and video. And so you have these components. So video lives in a lot of different platforms and formats right now. I mean, it could be on social media. It could be a 2-minute news story, sort of standard TV story, or a 2-hour documentary. But some of the fundamentals around filming and writing to pictures is kind of the same. So let's get started. Good visual stories really start with a strong idea. And strong ideas start with a community connection and understanding. So Imsit Nogama is all my relations in Mi'kmaq. So for Mi'kmaw people, just like other Indigenous peoples, when we say Msitnogama, all my relations, it really, it doesn't mean, hey, cousin. It really means, the ecology that we are a part of, right? So the animals, the waterways, the landscape. As Indigenous people, we live in that space. As journalists, as Indigenous journalists, we also live in that space. We know the balance. We know when things are out of balance. And so we know what the important stories to tell. We know what those stories are. And so part of maintaining that relationship and reciprocity and responsibility to community is a really important part of storytelling. But we're going to talk about stories that really work well for video. So essential story ingredients, it's not a long list. Obviously, I think good visuals, good visuals are important. So it could be a protest or a rally, but it could also be, river restoration or something quiet. So, but strong visuals are really important. But let's break it down even more. So information, that is our bread and butter as journalists. That's what we deal in. We have information. We research and gather, verify, and communicate accurate information. So that's kind of that's our number one job, right? But if we're doing it for video in particular, we need action, right? So we need someone doing something for a reason. Big action, like I said, like a rally, or quiet, right? It could be an artist crafting or quill work or making a drum. Sometimes it's something, quiet. It doesn't always need to be big action, but we really need someone doing something for a reason. It's kind of that fundamental focus statement, and it really guides how we're going to approach our story, what we're going to film, who we're going to talk to. And we need emotion, right, in a story. Any story. It's true for journalism. It's why we watch movies and read books, right? Because emotion allows us to relate and connect to the person in the story. I always tell students that if the people in our stories don't care about the issue or the event or the topic, then why would the viewer care, right? And emotion, we don't need people crying. Emotion can be really quiet, but it can also be passion and frustration or concern or joy. But we need the people in our story to care so that it makes our story, gives it that human element. And that's why we need people. People are kind of essential. We interview people, we're filming with people. But I always say, even if I'm doing a story about, I don't know, horses or lobster here on the East Coast. I've done some stories about lobster. Even if I'm doing a story about that and I'm all my viz and I haven't talked to any people, it's still people who are watching. My story is still for people. But typically we're interviewing people to tell stories to other people. So people are an essential part of our process, and we need to keep that front and center. Writing to pictures and sound. I would also stress that when we say writing to pictures, video is a platform that really is much more immersive, right? So it's video and it's audio. So that could be our interviews, it's our own voice, and it's the natural sound of whatever's happening that we capture when we record it. And people, because we are that window, right? So when I'm in Muskrat Falls and everyone comes out of the gate and you can hear the chatter and the cheers. And later on, there was an Inuk girl drumming. People want to hear that and see it. And so audio is really, really important. And it's not just an editing thing. Obviously, sometimes we're our own editors or another editor might be editing. It's also something you need to think about when you're writing. So that you're writing in a way that ties all those elements together. And so hopefully you can hear this audio as well, although it's less important, but I'm just going to put the rules up. Explain some quick rules. Explain, don't narrate, and less is more. So let's just listen. Always will be! From the river to the sea! It's the invasion day. So it's the Invasion Day rallies in Australia. This says Melbourne, Australia. Oops, I don't have my other rule there. Less is more. So we have a lot of people marching. We can see the visuals. This is an annual event. We don't want to say in terms of narrating that thousands of people are marching in the streets of Melbourne, because we can already see that, right? And so part of really strong storytelling is adding value to what people can already see and hear. If we jump sort of to the middle.
No justice, no peace! No racist police! We need to go.
So here, we're in Sydney, right? So again, we wouldn't want to say thousands of people showed up in Sydney for Invasion Day rallies. I mean, maybe it's not obvious it's the Invasion Day rallies, but we can already see lots of people. So we need to add value. And that sound up, no justice, no peace, no racist police, is police racism and police accountability a big theme of both, of this particular rally? Is it what people are talking about? And so when we want our pictures and sound and our script, what we're writing, when we want our story to be cohesive, if that's the sound up that we're going to play, then we need to write to it, right? So we don't need to repeat it because we've already heard the chant. But then maybe we follow it up with some detail about, why police accountability is a concern, right? We're adding to the public record. So when we show up to events, or when we're doing a story, sometimes it's an event that happens and we just show up, and sometimes it's a story that isn't making any headlines, and we're the ones covering it on a little First Nation or Indigenous community somewhere. But we are adding to the public record, right? You have that quote, journalism is the first rough draft of history. But we are adding to the public record. And as Indigenous journalists, we have that sort of responsibility and role to almost correct the misrepresentations of how Indigenous people have been sort of portrayed in the narrative, in the mainstream narrative. So we get to inform the narrative. So it's kind of a big role. But when it comes to visual storytelling, I will say that less is more. So we do an enormous amount of research, whether you're doing a 2-minute news story or a longer 22-minute documentary, you do an enormous amount of research, but you're never going to be able to fit it all in. You're never going to fit in every bit of information. If you were at this rally, you might have done a lot of research about the history of Invasion Day, colonialism. There's a lot of deep, long history of trauma that you could talk about. You might talk to 10 different people. So you're going to have to find a way to tell that story that picks out the most salient, relevant, timely pieces that add to that important sort of public record and narrative of Indigenous peoples. I think it's really, really important that we remember that this is a form of oral storytelling, right? So, the public is not reading your script. The only other person who's going to read your script is the person vetting it, so your editor or producer. Everybody else is watching and listening. So it's a form of oral storytelling. So we write for the ear, right? Just like radio in a sense. We write for the ear. We have to make things listenable. So it's clear, it's concise, and conversational. So write like you talk, but maybe like you talk, like your best self, how you talk to an elder. I'm just keeping my eye on the chat. Oh, and so, so clear, concise, and conversational, active writing, so not passive, right? So a good example of this that struck me was, so the Mi'kmaw fisheries really made headlines in 2020. The Mi'kmaw were asserting treaty rights and treaty fisheries and moderate livelihood fisheries. Very complex story, right? So one of those stories that has a lot of context and a lot of history and legal rulings. And one of those stories where really, how do you tell that in a simple, straightforward way for the ear, clear, concise, and conversational, but also also like active writing and not passive, because active writing is, it attributes action, right? So one of the things that happened was a lobster pound was burned down during the protests. And at first, you know, as journalists, we don't know who did it. So we might say the lobster pound was burned down. But even after people were charged and then their names were known, I remember reading a story and they were still saying a lobster pound was burned down. And I was like, well, we know who, we can attribute that now. We can say protesters burned down the lobster pound, right? We can be pretty clear and more accurate when we attribute action. Select, don't compress. So again, it's that less is more. So include the telling details, but you don't have to tell all the details, which sometimes we know a lot of information and we want to stuff it all in. But select, don't compress, and one thought per sentence. So ideally in broadcast, you are not using commas. If you have commas, although I used one in select, don't compress. If you are using commas, then your story, your sentence is out of order, or it's just too long. So one thought per sentence, which is harder than it looks. So I thought I'd give an example. This is Jill Paul. This is actually based on a story that I did for reporting in Mi'kmaq. Well, I didn't do it, the students did it. But it was one of our stories that were published. So it highlighted Jill Paul, a member of the Sipekne'katik First Nation, runs a free workshop every Monday evening to teach other people in her community how to make ribbon skirts. So it's a fine sentence. If you were doing a text story, that's pretty straightforward. We know who it is. We know she's a member of the Sipekne'katik First Nation. She's running a free workshop every Monday. She's teaching other people in her community how to make ribbon skirts. But I kind of ran out of breath by the time I got to the end of that sentence. And so it's too long for broadcast writing. In broadcast, it would be much more Sipekne'katik First Nation member Jill Paul teaches people how to make ribbon skirts. She runs a free workshop for community members every Monday evening. That's not perfect, but it's a bit boring. But it's, you know, simple and straightforward. But now we have to think about the visuals that we have, right? So maybe here, I'll play this, but I'm just gonna mute it. Now we can see, we're gonna see that she's teaching people how to make ribbon skirts. So that's a little bit of narrating rather than explaining. So we want to add value, right? So we can see we're going to have clips from her. We're going to see people making ribbon skirts. Obviously, there's a lot more to the story that we can add. But we could say, you know, Jill Paul spends every Monday evening in the community sewing room. Don't forget, we said it before, Sipekne'katik First Nation, but in video, you have a font. You can always put that up on screen. We don't necessarily need to say it in our script. We could. It's not terrible. There's no really right or wrong, except maybe the commas. But maybe a next line. Maybe people want to pop it in a chat, right? So just based on this information, if you want to try your hand at a next line, you know, that sort of sums up that she's running this free workshop for community members. I already said Monday evening. But we can add value. They need to work together. We're going to have sound up. We're going to hear, you know, the sound of sewing machines and some laughter. I also think, you know, that the real story, and I put the clip, is the emotion, the opinion, and the motivation. And the real story always lives in like the why. Why do people do what they do? That's the heartbeat of any story. So why is Jill, I'll just play that again. Why is Jill teaching other people? So there's actually a lot more to the story. Like she has 4 kids and it was really expensive to outfit them in regalia. So she taught herself how to sew and then she wanted to pay it forward. So obviously that could really inform the script, but we were just sticking with that sort of basic little bit of information. But I put that the clip is the subjective, right? It's emotion, opinion, and motivation. And whatever we write is objective. Doesn't mean we're not biased. I think people have a lot of bias. We can't get rid of our bias. I give whole lectures on sort of the myth of an unbiased media. But by objective, we can be objective in our method. When we're journalists, we verify our information. We try not to use you know, we try to aim for neutral language. You know, that can be problematic too, because who decides that? But we just try to stick to the facts in our script. So we are objective. And the clips, the people in our story, they're the ones who give us the emotion and opinion, and you know, they're the ones that do that. So we leave that to them. And so we can think about really writing lightly with a light touch. Anyway, did anyone have any ideas? What did I write? I think I wrote, oops, I lost the script. I think I decided you could say something like she shares her time and expertise for free, or something like that. I don't know, that wasn't that creative, but it's just writing really simply, one thought per sentence, and leaving the sort of emotional opinion things to the clip. Because you know, oh, the other thing I want to say about that is if I said, just go back to this, because if I said, oh, the video's not going to play. If I said that Jill was upset, or concerned, just say she was concerned that they're going to lose funding for the workshop. But I'm showing a picture of her laughing or smiling. It's not going to work. So we have to, that's why we have to be really careful when we write, that we're making our words work with what people are seeing, because seeing is believing. And so the video's not playing. I'm having technical problems. Shoot. Of course. Eye versus ear. I'll just keep going and maybe it'll sort out. But eye versus ear, eye wins. I'm gonna work if I'll just go to another screen and then go back and maybe it'll play. No. Okay.
That's right. We could hear it, but it wasn't.
Yeah, no, I could hear it and it's not playing. I'm not sure. Maybe if I escape. No, I don't want to mess up the.
Yeah.
Shoot. Okay, well, eye versus ear, eye wins. So I'm not going to bother playing the video, but you can imagine if it shows a lot of people just walking really calmly. Shoot, I wish that this would play.
You click the A button, the red.
Yeah, it's just not doing it. Oh, that's always fun. Well, we're almost done anyway. It just shows people walking calmly. I'll just say that. So if we describe a crowd as angry, we could say angry crowd stormed the Capitol. I mean, that was a true story. It's not what's happening here. It's another Invasion Day protest, different one. But people are pretty chill. They're just walking along. So if we describe people as angry, or we say there was dozens, but there's clearly hundreds, or if we describe something that doesn't match what we're seeing, then people are going to believe what they see and not what we say. And I would also say to avoid adjectives and adverbs, right? So, you know, I think it was Stephen King who said the road to hell was paved with adverbs. So keep them to a minimum. I mean, sometimes we use words like typically or usually, but don't clutter your script with words ending in ly. And most times when we add an adjective, it's imparting our own bias, right? So keeping our script nice and tight and clean. If we describe things as tragic or alarming or polarizing or angry or sad or aggressive or terrible or heroic, says who, right? Says us. Like, so it's a way for us to add our own bias. Like, especially with video, we're showing people so they can decide that for themselves. Anyways, I don't know why the video didn't work, but so just a bit of a recap, and then we can maybe take a break for questions. You know, I have the just start writing, if you can see it on the screen there. So you've got great video, you've got solid audio, you did these amazing interviews, you're now hunched over your laptop and staring at a blank page. So how do you start writing? Just start writing. Writing is always rewriting, but for a visual story in particular, your first task is to decide what is your opening shot. What are you opening with visually? And we're going to talk a little bit about that after, just about how you think about, if your story is about horses or lobster, ideally that's what you'll sort of see. If you're, there's ways we introduce a story. This is very much writing to pictures, but when we start to shape a narrative, we're introducing people to the topic or to the event or to the action. And so we don't want to start in an office if we're interviewing someone who does horse racing, right? So it's about making it all match throughout the arc of our whole story as well. And just a tip about writing is if you can write without looking at your notes too much at first, because what stood out to you from your memory is usually the most relevant, salient things. Always go back and check your notes and fact check and all of that stuff and get accurate, quotes or clips. But generally, what stood out to you is what's most important, what you remember as a journalist from that day. So the explain, don't narrate, less is more. Even though we want to fit all the information in there, select, don't compress, one thought per sentence, write for the ear, clear, concise, and conversational. And your copy is objective, meaning sort of neutral as we can make it. We didn't add a bunch of adjectives. And our clips, we're going to leave the feelings and emotions and expertise and opinions to the people in our clips. They can say how they feel. We don't need to say it for them. So questions, you can pop them in the chat or just ask. I'm going to stop sharing just so we can actually, you can see me better.
Super. If you have any questions, as Trina said, feel free to raise your hand or you can pop in the chat and I will verbally ask them. Maybe while people are kind of getting their thoughts together, I can ask Trina, what are some of the things, can journalists who are starting out kind of plan for what visuals they're looking for and think about what kind of words they want to put to them beforehand? And what would you kind of recommend around that?
Oh, totally. I think picking a story, like I said, that if someone's doing something for a reason, right? That then you have an action. So if I'm raising money for a cause that I really believe in, well, I have a motivation, right? So why am I doing it? But what am I doing? And sometimes action is quiet, right? Like I might be just making a lot of phone calls. I might be going door to door. Like sometimes it's more obvious and sometimes it's less obvious. For video, though, you really need to think. You don't want to just wallpaper a story with random shots that kind of work with that line of the script. Oh, I talked about a school, so I showed a picture of a school because I listed off things that were important to this person, schools and healthcare and parks, and then I showed a picture of each thing. Sometimes we'll do a montage like that when it fits, but really thinking in scenes so that you're introducing a person or a location or something, but there's an action tied to that. And even in a 2-minute story, right? Thinking about what is this going to look like? That can be really hard. Like a lot of stories that I've done have been like looking back at things that happened before, right? And especially in investigates. And so you're coming at it analytically after it's happened. And so it's hard to kind of think about what the viz is. You kind of do have to play mini director sometimes with people. And we all have gotten the boring office B-roll where you get people to walk in and sit down, and you do have to know how to do that because sometimes that's the shot that's the scene you're gonna get. But sometimes really thinking about what people can do. I remember I see a hand raised. I'll just finish the story. I remember doing a story, and I had a camera operator. We were in Kjipuktuk First Nation, and he passed away. But John Levi was the war chief, and he felt like the RCMP were not tackling drugs in the community. And so I was on the phone with them. We were in the community, but we were up at the band office. And he said, "Well, I'm going to make signs because I'm going to set up a sign at the entrance to the reserve, and I'm going to stop. I'm going to make like a checkpoint." And I said, "Wait, don't make the sign. We're going to come." because we want to film you making the sign, right? So you have to break down action and think about what you can film. And then so we started the story with a sign, with him making the sign, and then he drove us around the community, and then he set up the checkpoint. So you're thinking in scenes to tell that story. He took us around the community and told us the things he loved about the community, what he was worried about. We see him making the signs. Why is he doing that? We're leading up to, we can't, if we just stood at the checkpoint with him, it'd be a really short story with very limited viz. But so getting the visuals in a much more thoughtful way really helped us tell the full story. Yeah. Hi. So we have, I'm not, you can, maybe I'll let you pronounce your name, Kjipuktuk. I don't know that I'm saying that right.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, I don't know why I'm saying sorry.
Yeah, it's your name. I should say sorry for mispronouncing it, no doubt.
No worries. Yeah, my name is Kjipuktuk. I'm happy to be here today and learn all of this. But my question is, being a journalist, like I really love doing storytelling and like meeting people and everything. What I'm struggling with is completing a story quickly, like be efficient. It's sometimes it's hard for me to decide to select things to put in the story and have it ready for the broadcast. So I don't know if you have any tips on like being ready to do a story quickly with also writing it. I mean,
it's always hard. Like that story that I did that I showed the start of that was about Muskrat Falls. That was so close to deadline. I'm sure if anyone from APTN was on the production team that day, because I wanted to get it right, and I was like, there had been so much that happened that I was like, yeah, I was struggling a little bit. Like, where did I start? Do I start at that moment? Do I lead up to that moment? Like, I didn't know necessarily. There's so much context, events had happened, and I had all this tape, and I'm trying to listen to it, and it can be really, really hard, right? I find breaking it down and just deciding, because are you telling visual stories or more like print stories?
well, I'm at APTN News in
Okay, so you're doing the video story. So so a big sort of tip is to like I said, really think about what stood out for you. Like, so you went to a press conference, which are always terrible TV, but sometimes necessary. Most times the story lives outside whatever the press conference is about. So when you do a story and you do go to the press conference, you've been assigned that and you go and you cover it, know that the real story lives somewhere else. So you can always do a follow, get everyone's contact information, because if it's a story about a press conference about funding for on reserve housing or off reserve housing or something, somebody's impacted. So now we have to find the people and then go actually to the community and do the story and find, and that's the better story. But regardless, sometimes that quick turnaround is the press conference. Things that, like I said, take notes. Don't get too tight. You're going to get press releases and you can't you can't get stuck on other people's language, right? So you have to use your language. That's just not even a visual storytelling thing, right? We don't want to use borrowed jargon from other people. We want to use our own words. And so it's important that we understand what happened so we can put it in our own words. Sometimes, if you're doing a story with sciencey, like you have to really make sure you understand it. And then what stood out for you, right? Your story doesn't have to be the same as like CBC and CTV. Like don't even look over there, right? Just what stood out for you? What was the most important thing? What was the sometimes when you're listening to tape, because sometimes there's people talking, you've done an interview, make a note of like, oh, there it was. Okay, that was about 5 minutes in. Like make a mental note or just jot it down. That was a good clip. So you can just find it. Because sometimes on daily news, you're not going to actually have a chance to listen through you're not going to transcribe your whole interview again. You're just going to listen for those little, and people don't always talk in clips. So when you hear it, make a little note so that you can easily find it after. And then writing without looking at your notes a little bit too much, what really stood out? What was the most sort of important thing? And then just start writing from there, right? Remember, visual storytelling too, like is not the pyramid, right? That in, print journalism is a pyramid. We start with all the most important information at the top, and then the context and everything goes down the bottom, which is often problematic for Indigenous stories. There's a lot of stories about Indigenous peoples, and they're at the bottom. Their voices, the clips or quotes from them are at the bottom, and it's like they need to flip it. So sometimes that's a bit of a problem. In visual storytelling, you're literally starting the beginning, the middle, and the end. So the beginning, and obviously you write sometimes I write the intro for the TV host later. But just to start, what's the viz? Like visually, what are people going to be looking at visually? Was there a sound up that was really like could have been a chant or could have been sometimes a sound up can be like somebody like opening a door and coming in or walking up the steps. It doesn't have to be big sound. It doesn't have to be drumming. APTN actually put a kibosh on drumming sound ups for a while because we were all start. If you're at a press conference, there's like no sound. They open with drumming and we all use that. But then it wasn't really appropriate because drumming had nothing to do with the story, right? And drumming is a form of prayer and chant often. And so then we're just using this little piece of it performatively. Anyways. But think about your visuals, like what's the opening shot? Because that's going to help you start thinking about, okay, I have to start my story here. Who's your main person? The main person in your story, because you're also going to want to start sort of with them, right? And okay, so the intro, I need to hook people in. So what's kind of hint what the story's about. And then I have to introduce my first person, or I have to set that up. And I have to maybe set location. Like there's certain things you kind of need to do. And sometimes that's visual, but sometimes, you sort of have to add to it. A dozen people stormed the mayor's office demanding, blah, 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 right? So sometimes it's just setting up. And then the middle is usually where you sort of give a little context. And then the end is usually looking forward. What happens next? So once you sort of build that narrative, and you have your voices, just let the viz guide you. What's the strongest viz that you're going to open with? And then it is kind of complicated. So what really needs to be in here? Again, the things that stood out. Anything that when you're listening to an interview or you're at a press conference, anything that makes you go, huh, is usually interesting, right? And so make a note of that. You're not going to be able to report everything, but you have to just report the most salient little bits. I hope that helps. I'm actually going to give an example of a script, so maybe that will help too. We're going to talk about this when I go back to my slides.
We are not going back to your slides. We are doing one more question and then we are unfortunately out of time. So there is a question in the chat. So if I can read it out, it's after selecting the opening shot, would you edit images first or write first? Which would you recommend and why?
That is a really good question. I have, I one time edited, because it was in my brain, a whole chunk of a story without writing a bit of script. Like I had just shot it and came back and was like, okay, it needs to go. Like I just had that in my head. So I edited that and it really stayed unchanged in the story because it was the way it all worked together. It was like capturing actuality. We do as reporters, there's a lot of information, so we have to fit that in there. But my process was always to go through my tape, figure out the shots, even if it's a paper edit. Sometimes I would just start it and just so I knew where I was starting. And then, you fit the script in. But generally I kind of it was a little bit of both sometimes, to be honest. But I knew my first shot, even if it was just on paper. And I knew the sound ups that I was going to use. So they actually were put on paper. So even if I hadn't edited them, I was kind of paper editing them. It's like, okay, I got that sound up there, so I'm writing to it. So even when I'm writing my script, I'm writing in those editing cues, even if they're just for myself. So I don't know if that answered the question. Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Super. Okay. Thank you so much. to everyone who has joined us for this first workshop session with Trina. We're so happy to have had you. And thank you for bearing with us with our start and technical difficulties. We're going to do more of these in the program, and we certainly hope to see you again there. We're going to ask the fellows who are part of the Growing Indigenous Storytellers Fellowship Program to stick around. And everyone else.
They will see my slides. There
Perfect. Yes, they will see your slides. Thank you so much, Trina. And again, hope to see everyone else at the next ones. If you have any feedback, please email Canadian programs or canadian.programs@jhr.ca. We would love to hear from you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining.